black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I would like to welcome you to a part 3 of a 4-part series that the first 2 parts I started last month, and then I continue on with these 2 series, part 3 and part 4, this month. For those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, my name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And also that only through dialogue can there be a shift in consciousness. So when you understand and you be able to articulate the truth, the accurate truth of who we are as people of African descent, this is the purpose of this show, to talk from our perspective, centered in who we are and why we feel the way we feel today. Why we are pretty upset about things that's happening, especially after the last election. You see a lot of black people online saying, we just backing off from this because we tried to warn people. We tried to actually do good. The reason we voted for Kamala Harris was to prevent what is going on right now in America when it comes to the people who are in charge of the federal government and some state legislations, the MAGA type folks, okay? And the same type of mentality that is pushing this is nothing new to us, but we would not listen to it. When I hear people say that, why are we so divided today? Well, let's look at this first image that's up there, okay? Stop saying as a nation we've never been so divided. This was just in my lifetime, 57 years ago, okay? Or even before that. But, where you had this separation, okay, where black people were second-class citizens, even though after a 4-year devastating civil war, like I talked about in the first show, I even went back to the founding fathers in the show number 1, where I talked about how the Constitution that people even talk about today put us at 3/5 of a human being. That means the South had the ability of getting extra vote by the enslaved people that looked like me. That 3/5 meant that for every 500 enslaved people, those in the South, which became the Confederacy later on, would get 300 votes, even though we had no say in the matter. So America, that's separation. And also the first DEI law that came into being, I said in the first, and continued on in the second show, and I'm just going to review it, was the Constitution itself. Because by those laws at the time, didn't include us, didn't include women, include white males. And today we're still seeing this type of mentality of white male domination. This has always been the issue with America. So when you say today in 2025 that we've never been this divided, America from its beginning, from its origin, I didn't even go back to the colonial times, with the law, the slave codes that were then there from the 1600s, has always kept us divided. And also, the way the Constitution works, I want to bring this point on before I continue, is that if you read any of what was called the Federalist Papers today, but there was a series of 88 essays that James Madison, and Hamilton wrote, explaining to those who would have to ratify the Constitution after it was sent out to the different colonies. They put these essays in newspapers throughout the colonies to explain why they had to do it and what it really means and how the Constitution is supposed to work. Okay, but one of the things that they understood too, about the burgeoning American system that's established by that Constitution was the fact that they understood that how do you control all these special interests? Okay, that's a division too, because people in the New England states where they had to deal with boats would have a different interest when it comes politically to those who were in the Midwest where the farming and wheat growing, and those in the South with cotton. So even in the establishment of the Constitution, they understood that there would be a struggle. Each interest group would keep each other in check. That's how this American system works. Okay, it has always worked by being separate. Like armies constantly putting each other in check. That's a well kept secret that you don't understand. Maybe wasn't even taught if you even had a civics class about how the American system worked. And people of African descent, the people that another thing that the Constitution did was create a caste system. Believe me, it was a caste system, and that is what we had to experience as people of African descent and Native people and other people who were not white and male. Okay? It was a caste system. Even white females even though they were dominated by the male, didn't have the rights. And that's what we are seeing in this image right here. You think this is something hyperbole? Let's go on to the next one. Look at that little child there. That's Ruby Bridges. She's now, just trying to go to school. She had to deal with this. Okay? How dare you go to our school? It's not a caste system, really? You think that's not the same as how a person in India who is a different class will be treated by an upper class? White America has always been conditioned to be the upper class. It's in the law. Okay? The people who threw the rocks at Ruby Ridge, as it's saying here, for trying to go to school, and this is 1960, now are upset their grandchildren might learn about them throwing rocks at Ruby Bridges for trying to go to school. Okay? That's the CRT controversy that we had to deal with. Why we need to teach black history, to understand the system that we had to deal with. That's why black people voted the way they voted in November, because they understood the truth. They recognized this image. We experienced it. Ruby Bridge is still alive. This young child, we remember the Ruby Bridge and many other children who had to deal with what you see here. Do they look any different than the people who went January 6th and stormed the Capitol building? No. Same mentality, same belief of superiority, and how dare they give somebody integration and civil rights and all those things. We didn't deserve it for some reason. Okay, even though we were American citizens from the 14th Amendment, which was established for us. Let's get that straight. But used by other people, including white women. Let's go on to the next one. Now, I jokingly, when I see this, I kind of think of some of the, and I got to talk to our brothers and sisters today who are comfortable in their delusion that we've come a long way. No, we ain't come a long way from this. I've seen certain video clips of showing young women, black women, who get upset with a brother who takes them to a restaurant they think is not 4-star, 5-star restaurant, and how dare they bring them to that. You see the video clips, but not too long ago, it just in my generation. Okay, this is what we had to do just to go to a 5 and dime, and this is what we had to deal with as black people. You wonder why we're kind of always leery about, especially liberals. We had white allies. This is America, but look what we had to deal with in order to have a lunch. It was not allowed in America. America has never been this divided. Please, let's go on to the next one. Show you. This is what we had to deal with, just to eat. You understand the trauma that black folks had to deal with from other American citizens? These young men up there, I'm sure, had red MAGA hats on today. They might be older, but they still have the same type of mentality that forced them to say, do this. They don't want to face this truth. Because they use a CRT as an excuse to ban books or ban images that show you this is the America that black Americans had to deal with, yet we stayed loyal. Let's go on to the next one. Yes, again, we had white allies, and if you don't understand black history, you won't recognize the allies of white allies that we've had. This is just to sit down and eat, folks. Nothing else. Walk out of the street that you take for granted today and go sit down at a restaurant. And the people who are in charge now wants to bring us back to that. They're saying that, it used to be federal law to prevent that these folks made possible by their sacrifice. You don't think that brother was pissed off, wanted to lash out? He would have been hung. Who don't know what would have happened to her? But you had to deal with that. And again, it wasn't that long ago. Okay? Generation X, you millennials, are only 2 generations away from that. And if you didn't vote this last November, this is what you insulted. The people had to deal with this to give you the right that you think is normal. No, we had to fight for this for over 100 years after the Civil War, after the 13th and 14th and 15th Amendment. This is in the 1960s and 50s, and we still had to deal with that. And you letting the same type of ideology manifest itself today in 2025. Let's go on to the next one. Again, riding a bus that you take for granted today, or people would be insulted if they even rode a bus, but there was a system in place, a caste system that said colors, people that look like me and you, go to the back of the bus. Okay, this is in Montgomery. This is 1934, but it didn't matter. 1934, 1964, still was having that issue. Let's go on to the next one. This young child, for colored patrons only. You think we deserve this in America as black people? But this is what we had to live. This is what your ancestors had to do. And I'm talking about your grandparents, not your ancient grandparents, just your grandparents that might be sitting in the living room right now with you would be that little baby boy right now. Still alive, but throughout his life, he had to deal with this America, majority of it. Even though those things were, by the civil rights laws, were taken down by federal laws, because only each state was having separate types of laws, but the federal laws is what the Civil Rights Act did, which had been constantly being dismantled by the Supreme Court today. We don't need to have a civil rights. Really, we think this mentality has changed. Look what's going on now. That's my point. All right, they're always trying to bring back white domination. When we say white supremacy, that's what we're talking about. Society for hundreds of years, not for just a couple of decades, hundreds of years. We had to deal with that. Not only our black folks, but brown and Native American people today. This is how we had to live, folks. Just a few decades ago, not many years. I want you to understand what you're non-voting, or you don't understand why you need to vote, or why you don't need to be aware to protest, because this is what you want to, when they say, let's make America great again, this is the America that they're talking about, because it wasn't definitely great for us. That brother had to stand up cramped in the back, where we had all these empty seats, but no, okay? No, there's a caste system. This is what America has always been. Until you realize that, okay, we bring about truth, where people have been talking fiction when they try to rearrange that. We never gone back to that. Okay, this is in North Carolina. Okay, white patrons, please seat at the front. Colored patrons, please sit from the rear. And, of course, no smoking, please. Let's go on to the next one. Even had segregated, separate benches where you could sit down to wait on the bus. This is the America, when you hear, let's make America great again, that's what the Project 2025 and all these executive orders are trying to bring back. Okay, the laws, because it wasn't done by some kind of natural event, it was done by American laws. Okay, when you hear states' rights, the states who are, and you have the Republican state representatives pushing back laws like this. This is what they're talking about. Segregate again. This part of the bus for the colored race. How insulting! But this was the world we had to deal with, and you might have allowed that kind of mentality into the White House in 2025. Okay, this is what we were fighting. This is why we were screaming and hollering to vote for the first black woman and qualified black woman in 2024. But you couldn't see that because either she was black, and that same mentality. This is what people were brought up on. Let's go on to the next one. Going up to a movie. Okay, you had to go to the back or to the side. The movie entrance is around the corner. Going into restaurants. This is what we had to do as black people. Again, in my lifetime. Let's go on to the next one. This would have been how old I was at this time. And look at that police officer's face. This young black kid would just hold up a sign saying that, civil rights, the rights to vote. But he was from a different caste, let's just say. This is the history that they don't want you to learn, but this is American history. This is not just black history. This is American history, okay, in relation to us. This is why we think the way we think. This is why we are looking at people who say that, why you want to deal with that in the past. No, the present moment is embedded in the soil of the past. The psychological, this child as an adult most likely, especially like me, remember these things. Okay? Let's go on to the next. We're voting for we're having marches right now for the same thing that we had back then. Okay, as Martin Luther King said, these protests are just the voice of the unheard. And are we heard here in 2025? No, because the same type of thing called racism exists that existed then. Black people have always seen that. Who's better to understand and learn and warn, like we did for the past 2 years of white supremacy and neo-Nazism and all these things that control the population? We are experts at it, but we weren't listened to in 2024. Let's go on. And it takes this type of effort sometimes. This type of sight. This is, sister Rosa Parks. You don't think she was terrified? You don't think she could have stayed as her job at one of the downtown clothing stores as a seamstress? But she sat on that bus to initiate what became the Montgomery bus boycott. But she went to jail. How many people you hear, this is what she had to deal with? This is the sacrifice that people who did not vote last November spit in the face of, the sacrifice that she made. And let's go on. We saw and Martin Luther King. This is Martha. This is what he had to deal with, back then. 32 times this brother was arrested for you. Okay? The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in the moment of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenges and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life to be for the welfare of others. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay? That's why we honor him. How many of you are right now sitting back home complaining about what's happening, with the government jobs being lost, with a lot of the constitutional rights being ignored, and just sitting at home just complaining, but won't go out and do what these folks did and our generation did? This is why I'm doing these shows, to let you know what's at stake and why we cannot just be complacent. Politics is a war. These are the soldiers in the war. This is how Martin Luther King was treated. He wasn't given a statue. Nobody at that time who put him there. Again, who is doing it. Not people with Ku Klux Klan's hats, police officers. That's why black people always had a distrust for the police, not because they were criminals, the black people were criminals, because police were enforcing the laws of America. This is an enforcement of a law, which affected us. Not only Martin, but he had somebody there to take that image, but you don't know how many brothers and sisters had to deal with that because they sat at a lunchroom table, or they went into a restaurant somewhere. They had to form what you call a green book in order to, when you're traveling from New York to a family member in South Carolina, you had to know where to stay, or otherwise this would happen to you. This is America. Make America great again. This is what it looks like. You heard the words. I'm showing you the images. Let's go on to the next one. Okay. Yes, you say that marches are weak. This is what our brothers had to deal with. Okay. This was that famous Bloody Sunday, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and who was again beating on our people? The police, the law enforcement. Since the first police department, modern type the police department, came into existence in Boston, I think in the 1820s or the 1830s, 1828 or 1838, do you think that they were there to protect and to serve black people? Or what has always been the case, even before that, when they were the first, they came out of the slave catchers, they were there to control and contain us, because the law said we only segregated into this system, in this neighborhood, in this community. And if you move out of that community, we will enforce the law. And this is how they enforce the law on black folks. And this is only 2 generations away from who we are right now. 2 or 3 generations. A generation about 20 years. So if you look at 60 years, anybody who is 60 right now, they were their children during that period of time. Let's go on. This is another victim you might not have heard of, but I want to show you what it was like just to protest. This is a brother named Jackson, who was a civil rights activist in Marion, Alabama, and a deacon in the Baptist Church on February 18, 1965, while participating in a peaceful voting rights march in his city. He was beaten and fatally shot by police. Okay? So Jackson was unarmed and was protected his mother from the police at the time of his beating. He was only 27 years old. Sacrificed his life, and you said, I'm not going to vote. It just bothers me when I hear people say that. Let's go on to the next one. Now, talk about black men are not involved. Well, these are 3 brothers who went to this black HBCU called South Carolina State in Orangeburg, South Carolina. Many of you are familiar with it. Again, on February 8, 1968, 9 South Carolina Highway Patrol officers in Orangeburg, South Carolina, fired into a crowd of protesters demonstrating against segregation at a bowling alley near the campus of the HBCU, South Carolina State College at the time. 3 men were killed and 27 were wounded in a violent series of events that would become known as the Orangeburg Massacre. The 3 men killed were Henry, let's speak their name, Henry R. Smith, age 18, and Samuel Hammond Jr., age 18, and high school student, Delane B. Middleton, age 17, just to protest about go to a bowling alley was close to on campus. They had to die because this cast wanted to come and mingle with that white cast who were allowed into that hotel that bowling alley. America has always been a caste system. Okay. We still call it racism today, but it's a caste system. You wonder why poor whites vote against their own interests. Well, they rather vote against their own interests than let another caste be equal to them. It was said during the Civil War when a Confederate soldier was captured, and he was from Tennessee. And you hear a lot of people today say, well, my parents didn't have any slaves. He didn't have any slaves. And it was a New York reporter that asked him, because he was captured after one of the battles in Tennessee, I think. He said that I am white, and even though I'm poor, I am not equal to those black people, okay? Because they were another caste. And he'd rather go to war and risk his life to maintain the system, even though he was at the bottom of the socioeconomic strata of the white caste that was created by the Constitution, okay? Because of Civil War, we didn't have the 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment. We were enslaved. Majority people of our people were enslaved. And he'd rather go to war, a civil war. And I talked about that in the previous shows. But I want you to understand, you know, these cops thought like him, and how dare these young black men, the way they look at black men today, and you talk about all the traffic stops and how we get shot and killed just for looking suspicious, is not the same type of mentality. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, the movement. This was a magazine. Okay, again, cops doing this. I'm not knocking all cops, but it's a culture. A culture. Let's go on to the next. Who said we were satisfied? This is all we've been asking. We are not satisfied by what you dictate to us. You say that DEI today, diversity, equity, and inclusion program, which is established us to satisfy us, to force the illegal and immoral discrimination practice found in the federal government, the state governments, and in white corporate America, you know, because white supremacy ideologies, which brought about the experience that he's talking about, existed in some form or another in American society throughout the history of America. And I'm going to stop right there with that look. He's looking at you. He's looking at me. And if you're going to sit back and allow what you see going on in Washington today, as they erode all the things, him and all those folks that you saw did what they did, and thousands of them more. I could have more and more images. You know, and you didn't vote this past November, then whatever's happened today is your fault. Okay? You forgot the sacrifice that were made. So until next time, though, I'm going to leave it right here and remember, you know, the past and the present are one. Okay? So until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.